So let me briefly introduce the speakers to you. We'll have in the room Anita de Horde, my colleague within the Finance Biodiversity Foundation and also advising on the community work under the platform. Johan will be explaining also about the overview of measurement approaches. We have the practitioners' perspectives from ING Bank, represented by Radoslav, and also Jean-Guillaume, on behalf of Sycomore, will share his experiences with us. And we're happy also to have Jessica in the room, UNEP FI. She's leading on the ecosystems work. So yeah, next slide. I'm happy that the echo has disappeared. So we'll first look into the guide that was developed with the 6 different measurement approaches, and then hear the practitioners' perspectives. There'll be a Q&A of both sections, and we'll close with some way forward suggestions. Next slide, please. So Jerome, if you could step in over here, and we'll share the video that we made with Tom through the website, together with the recordings of the webinar. Jerome, colleague in the BID platform, coordinating the whole platform.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie, for the kind introduction, and hello everybody. Very happy to be here. I'm Jerome Kishelevich, a lead managing consultant within ICF, and I act as overall coordinator of the European Business and Biodiversity Platform. Pretty challenged to step into Thomas Verhey's foot, but here I am. I'm very happy to welcome you all on this exciting webinar. It's a very important one on the journey of the platform, not only by the number of registrants, which has skyrocketed our previous record, but also because of the topic and I think the timing of it as well. Obviously, there is a strong momentum currently in the policy, corporate, and of course, financial community around biodiversity. And although there is a lot of things happening, a lot of reports being published, and a lot of attention, we are still very much at the beginning of the journey to bring biodiversity at the core of the financial sector and society as a whole. So overall, looking at the big scheme of things, green finance, as we call it, only represents 2% of the overall capital market globally. So still a long way to go to convince and mainstream across the 98 remaining percent. But as I said, the timing is right, not only because of the strong policy support with the Green Deal clearly calling for nature to be valued and to the full integration of biodiversity and natural capital into decision making is both by policymakers, businesses, and financiers. But also the timing is right on the way to the CBD COP15 and the strong momentum and business momentum on that journey towards the COP happening now and confirmed for October in China. I will not take much more of your time, and I think we've got a very exciting agenda ahead, so I'll probably leave it here, but just to say that today will be very great to learn about the latest state of the art of these tools and measurement approach dedicated to financial institutions, and I'm very happy that the pledge and the platform and the commission managed to put that all together very efficiently, and I'll now leave the floor for the next speakers. And you will share, as Anne-Marie said, the great video that Tom did in the thank you email, so you all have his message as well. Thank you all, and have a great session.
Thanks a lot, Jerome. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we're having the Finance and Biodiversity Community since 2017, part of the European Business and Biodiversity Platform. And this group has initiated the Finance for Biodiversity Pledge, which was launched in September last year. Measuring biodiversity has been high on the agenda of this community already since it starts, always a high priority topic. And we're collaborating on this topic with the workstream methods, which is led by Johan Lamarand, and he will also be explaining about it. Next slide, please. So we made this overview of measurement approaches, but a little bit of background. So part of the pledge commitments, which is signed by 37 signatories, and there's more coming, we'll have a next launch in May this year, is assessing impact. So because this is also an important part of the commitments, we decided together with the group to make a comparison of the methods that are already out there at the moment. Next slide, please. And together with the pledge, we made a guidance document. So there's one page already dedicated to assessing impact, but we felt a need to elaborate a bit more on this. And the result of it is the guide that we'll be deep diving into today. And we'll do that together with my colleague, Anita de Horde. Next slide, please. So I'll hand over to her and she'll introduce you into the guide and how this guide has become what it is right now. Please, Anita, go ahead.
Thank you, Annemarie. Thank you all for coming to this webinar. Quite well seeing almost 200 participants. Fantastic. I will talk you through the guidance document we made on biodiversity measurement for the financial sector. But first, a step back, why we made this guide. Next slide, please. Myself, I have some background in climate measurement and I also worked for many financial institutions. So for myself, biodiversity was very new a couple of years ago. I was puzzled by the complexity of biodiversity criteria and its drivers of loss. And over the past year, we've been talking a lot with financial institutions, signing the commitments, the Biodiversity Pledge. And one of the main questions we heard was, how can we measure, how can we start measure biodiversity, impact and also dependencies. Many registration shows that measurement is hot, but hopefully the topic of nature and biodiversity get even much more hotter, especially this year with the CBD, the Convention of Biodiversity, COP15 coming up in October in China, where an important decision will be made on a post-2020 biodiversity framework on targets, hopefully ambitious enough. Next slide. This is the guidance document and the content table. The guide report we made, if you have not seen it yet, we will send you an email after this webinar and we'll send you the link so you can see it. There are 6 chapters. The most important one is chapter 3, which gives you an overview of the difference between the 6 measurement approaches for financial institutions. I will tell more about it in a minute. Chapter 4 is important. We will give more detailed information on the measurement tools itself. Chapter 5 will include case studies of tool developers and financial institutions that started with measurement of certain portfolios or companies. And in chapter 2, we highlighted how we selected the measurement approaches, and it gives details on the criteria for selecting and comparing the tools. Next slide. This is about the sources we used. This report was not possible without the work that has been done by the EU Business and Biodiversity Platform. For 3 years in a row, the platform looked into biodiversity measurement for businesses and financial institutions. Johan Lamarant of the platform will tell more about this after my presentation. And we, of course, checked all the data with the tool developers. Hereby, I would like to thank all the tool developers, if they're in the room, the virtual room, for their patience of us sending lots of questions and formats to answers. Next slide. The contributors to the guide, the members of the Finance and Biodiversity Community, and the signatories of the pledge have contributed in several brainstorms and conference calls we organized, especially on the business applications for the financial sector. We had good discussions beforehand. I would like to special thank to Carina and Colette of Actiam, and also Rado of ING and Dimitrios of Piraeus Bank, because they also really looked in detail to the draft version of the text and thinking along with formulating the business applications. Next slide. That's about the selected measurement approaches. As you can see, we compared in totally 6 measurement approaches that are at this moment in use by the financial sector. I will go through them. The first one is CBF, which is used by the French consortium of AXA, BNP Paribas, Mirova, Sycomore. The second one, BFFI, which is developed by ASN Bank together with Krem and Prey. and is in use within the BBAF initiative. The third one is STAR, which is developed by ICN. Then we have GBSFI and BIA, BIA, which are developed by CDC Biodiversity. And then we have ENCORE, which is developed by WCMC. And we used 3 criteria for selecting these tools. The first one is they have to be relevant and or currently used by financial institutions. The second one was they have to include all main drivers of loss. So that means species, water, land use, air, all the most important drivers. And the third one is they have to be scientifically robust. We will yearly update this guide because we see that measurement approaches are developing and probably more will arrive soon within this year. So we will look at it yearly to see if any other measurement approaches should be added to this guide. Next slide, please. This is the overview on the measurement approaches. This is the table, and this is the main criteria we looked at. Johan will tell a little bit more about the biodiversity criteria. I will tell you a bit about the more finance and business applications. As you can see, we looked at organizational focus areas for financial institutions. So we looked at is the measurement approach usable for balance sheets, total balance sheets? Can it be used for portfolios, for sectors, index level, company level, project site level? We also looked at business applications. So it really depends what kind of measurement approach you choose on how you're going to use it for your organization. Are you going to use it for your current performance? Are you going to use it for your future performance? Would you like to track performance to targets you set on biodiversity? Would you like to compare options? Are you screening opportunities? Is it the total biodiversity accounting? Are you going to use it for ESG screening? These are all questions you need to ask yourself before choosing a certain measurement approach. And of course, we also looked at asset categories, and that's also different than looking using measurement approaches for businesses. Typically for financial institutions, it's important what kind of asset categories are you going to use it for. This overview, as you can see at the dots, is also looking at maturity level. That's still under development, and that's why we also want to update this maturity level per quarter, because it's also developing very quickly. So the more it's used and tested by financial institutions, the mature the measurement approach is, in our opinion. And I think my time is up. I will give the floor to Johan to give more information on biodiversity criteria and also tell a bit on the case studies that has been done with these measurement approaches.
Yes, thank you very much, Anita, for this introduction. So as you see, I am the methods workstream leader within the EU Business and Biodiversity Platform, and I will introduce you a little bit in the way of working over the past years and how we came to these typical characteristics for the tools. Next slide, please. So what we have been doing over the past 3 years is to bring together all these biodiversity measurement approaches for businesses and financial institutions that were popping up, and which in fact was very confusing for the business community and the finance community, because they all had their specific characteristics and so on. We brought them together, and I think over the years we managed to demystify, let's say, these tools and metrics by identifying the key characteristics of this global set of tools. And these key characteristics are presented here in this slide and also on the previous slide that Anita already showed you. And by means of this, by well-structured reports and tables, we were able to bring all this information from the different tools together in a good overviews, very visible and clear overviews, which allows us and you to compare all these tools. So apart from indeed the business applications and the organizational focus areas, which are of course very important, and then on top of that, the asset categories for financial institutions, there are of course a whole range of other potential criteria that are important for financial institutions to decide on the type of measurement approach. And I give a very short introduction on these key criteria that you see here. For instance, pressures. Not all tools measure the same or measure all the pressures on biodiversity. So you see here the 5 typical pressures as identified in the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Report and also by IPBES. And you see the range of the differences between the tools. Of course, it's up to you to decide if you go for a tool which measures only land use impacts on biodiversity or only climate change impacts on biodiversity, or if you use a wider scope. I would say the more the better, because it's important for biodiversity that you have a comprehensive view of all the potentially material issues for biodiversity. So it might require some first materiality analysis before you start identifying the main types of pressures. It can depend on the sector type, for instance. So it will depend on your portfolio that you will assess. Another criterion, of course, is are you interested in impacts on biodiversity, or are you also interested in the dependencies of companies on biodiversity? Then you enter into another area. You see here in the range of tools that, for instance, Encore recently, which was recently updated, and that originally focused only on dependencies, has now been expanded with impacts, for instance. And I'm very curious to see how also a number of other tools will include dependencies in their tool in the future. Scope is, of course, another area. Scope is added here because financial institutions are already familiar with the scope concept because it's based on the greenhouse gas protocol. It overlaps very much with the organizational focus areas that were introduced in the previous slide by Anita, but of course it's an important criterion. The metric deserves, that's a whole area on its own. There are a number of metrics available for capturing biodiversity, but as you all know, biodiversity is quite complex to capture, and we are not only speaking about habitats and species, but also about ecosystem services, for instance. You can value biodiversity in a quantitative way, but also in a monetized way. So there are different corresponding types of metrics available. In the last report that Anita mentioned that we prepared for the EU Business and Biodiversity Platform and that you can find on our website, we have detailed information about the differences between all these metrics, the differences between these pressures and so on. So I think it's useful to mention that apart from this guidance for the financial institutions, that there is plenty of additional background information available in the Update 3 report. So in fact, you should read them together. On monetization, an interesting evolution will be metrics on the financial financial risks faced by companies in the portfolio of financial institutions due to ecosystem degradation. This is a new area that is developing fast now. The Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures and other initiatives, by the way, are trying to develop approaches and metrics to come up with financial metrics to express that financial risk. Data availability differs also from tool to tool. So not all tools are using the same entry data, of course, and it depends a little bit on how far you want to go as a financial institution with diving into the available data sources. There are public data sources, other data sources require some more efforts. And that's our last criterion here, the efforts. Last year, for the first time, an effort has been done to collect information on what does it cost to apply a tool, what is the time spent for applying a tool, what is the level of expertise that you need as a company, and so on. This was done mainly from the perspective of businesses, but a lot of this information is also useful for financial institutions. What is not mentioned here in this overview is another criterion that is, of course, absolutely relevant, not only for businesses, but also for financial institutions to make a selection of the tools, is of course the sector applicability. We see that a number of tools are only specific for one typical sector. For instance, we have now a number of tools that are only addressing the agri-food industry. Like we also have tools that are only addressing the finance community, but these of course are included in this table. So this overview is extremely important to prepare to develop decision frameworks for companies and financial institutions on how to decide on how to select a suitable tool, suitable metrics, or a suitable combination of tools, because this is also possible for your specific situation. We have, in the last report that we prepared, in the update report 3, we have developed the concept of a navigation wheel. We did a very initial start with a navigation wheel for the finance sector. It needs to be further developed. And of course, every opinion on that is welcome, but there is, I just want to say there is much more to come. Next slide, please. So in the guidance that is now launched today and is presented, you find some short references to a number of case studies. The first 5 case studies are available again in the update report 3. They are very extensive. They have been prepared according to a uniform template, so you can compare them very easy. They have been quality reviewed by an independent external quality panel. The last one has been added, and there is a reference to an application of Encore by the Dutch Central Bank, but this application is not in the list of the elaborated case studies, let's say, by the EU Business and Biodiversity Platform. But this is something that we will address in the near future. And then one final slide, maybe, because it might be useful for you to, please, the next slide, if possible, to introduce you or to inform you a little bit about some trends that we see in what we call the evolving landscape of biodiversity measurement approaches. We see a trend towards more scientifically robust approaches, which is not surprising because there is also the initiative on science-based targets for nature. So apart from climate, there is now a new initiative focused on nature, including biodiversity. With the entrance point, it should be scientifically robust. And we see this is taken over by more and more businesses and also financial institutions, which is really good. There is a tendency to be in line with the global biodiversity indicators. So Annemarie referred already to the CBD. Also the Science-Based Targets Network for Nature will come up with targets, scientifically acceptable targets for biodiversity by the end of 2022. So there is a lot going on, and we see that companies and financial institutions are trying to align with it. Another one is that apart from the situation a few years ago, is that more and more companies now realize that there is not one and only biodiversity indicator, but there is a tendency towards a dashboard approach. For instance, STAR, which is focusing on species extinction risk, is a very specific angle of biodiversity, which is complementary to MSA, which is complementary to ecosystem services value, and so on. The same in parallel, we see a movement towards a smart combination of tools and also data sources, because Anchor, IBAT, and so on are more data sources, but we also see that the boundaries between data sources and tools are becoming quite vague. And then a few others, as I mentioned also, there is also an increased interest in developing metrics to express financial risk. And we see also an increased interest in natural capital accounting approaches, and the Align project and the Transparent project, for instance, which are financed by the European Commission, are perfect examples of that. And I think many of you are aware about these initiatives. Thank you for your time. And if you have questions, we are happy to address them now, I think, in the Q&A.
Thanks a lot, Johan. Oh, there's the echo again. There's a couple of questions that I'm hearing myself. It's gone now again. So one question is, what is important that it's geospatial data and whether it can be coupled to ownership, so that it can be coupled to ownership of a company. Do you know to what extent these methods do that? So is there a link? Do these methods use geospatial data of companies?
Yeah, geospatial data is becoming more and more important. We see that the problem is very often that the granularity, so the level of detail of these geospatial data, is not sufficient for being applied by companies. So we have a lot of very interesting maps which provide information at country level, even sub-country level, but to apply it by a company, that's really a challenge. So, but we also see that the level of accuracy, the level of detail, is improving all the time. And of course, I don't have to explain you that for biodiversity, in contrast to greenhouse gas emissions, that local data are extremely important. And that's why data sources like IBAT and other data sources are might be very interesting because they have this level of detail. But also the area of data, biodiversity data sources, is evolving very rapidly. So it's not only the tool, the area of measurement tools on its own, but also the area of data sources, which is useful to be focused on, to watch how this is evolving. You need both, yes.
Thank you. And then there's another question. So we'll answer most of the questions also with an email after the webinar, as we do not have enough time to answer all your questions, but thanks a lot for the questions. A question from Melissa on that all tools require external expertise. So does it mean that you need to hire people or have this background to make use of the tools?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yes, on that point, and I don't think it will be a surprise for you or for many of you that even you need to be careful with even so-called open source tools, because it's also our experience that when you try to apply an open source tool, that you are facing challenges and specific issues that you don't know, okay, how to go on. So I think applying biodiversity measurement tools without external support is not evident, unless, of course, you hire people in your own organization, of course. But it has been said already a few times, biodiversity is not so easy. It's quite complex, and external advice is certainly not well. I think it might be wise. It might be wise, but of course it case by case, up to you to decide. We have tried to map the tools in terms of the level of external support, the level of the cost. Is it open source? Is it open source with support? Is it a commercial tool? So in these tables, in the update report 3, you can already find a lot of information, but of course it needs always a tailored approach. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Johan, for all your expertise, and it's great to collaborate with you also with your work in the workstream methods. I'll hand over to my colleague Anita, because we're excited also to hear from the practitioner's perspective, and we'll answer your other questions through our email. Anita, may I hand over to you?
Sure.
To introduce them.
A little introduction on the practitioner side, who we invited. We have Radoslav Georgiev from ING Bank. ING is testing several measurement approaches, 2 of them, one of the 6, and also a few biodiversity databases they are using. So it's really interesting, I think, for us to learn more about how to start testing, what does it look like, how do you start, and also to learn more about how you can use several measurement approaches at the same time. Oh, I see myself double. Something happened with the screen. Not sure. Okay. And we have another practitioner presentation. That's from Jean Guillemot from Sycomore Asset Management. And he is a sort of dinosaur on biodiversity measurement. Sycomore is already measuring biodiversity since 2015. They also use several tools. So he will tell more about his experience, and also will give us some tips and tricks, what to do and what not to do by learning from his experience. So please, Rado, for you, the floor.
Thanks, Anita. Hello, everyone on the line. It's great to see this level of interest. I'm part of the global sustainability team at ING. We're a large commercial bank. I'll take you through some of the considerations we had when we started looking at the different tools and measurement approaches that exist to assess biodiversity impacts. If we can go to the next slide, I first want to give you a sense of who we are. Like I said, we're a very large bank, comparatively speaking. We have a global systemically important bank status, and that GSIB status comes with a responsibility to protect the financial system from systemic risk. And this is to a large extent why we've chosen a certain set of approaches to sustainability. For example, we can't really afford to exit an entire sector because that is a huge disruption to the financial system. So if we go to the next slide, please. So first, let's take a very quick look at why we decided to embark on this journey. If we go to the next slide, you'll see an overview of some of our key stakeholders. So in the past year, we've really noticed an increase in interest from across all sector groups. It's not just clients who've started asking us, but it's also investors, it's also regulators. We are based in a very ambitious region, the European Union. There's an ambition to demonstrate leadership, not just on the climate side, but also on the biodiversity side in this region. Our regulators have also started looking at biodiversity the same way that they look at climate risk, for example. There's international developments that are really starting to shape up the agenda, and so it was really the right time to start addressing the risks and opportunities associated with biodiversity. So if we go to the next slide, please. Let's look at some of the finance tools that we have at our disposal to act on the risk and opportunity side. If we go to the next slide, you see that just like with most commercial banks, we can use what I call carrots and sticks, or instruments on the risk side, but also on the positive side. So in terms of incentives, for example, in terms of interest rate discounts and so on. So on the exclusion side, like I said, we can't really exit an entire sector, but we can exclude, ring fence certain activities that are inherently very unsustainable. So for example, thermal coal mining, which has really large negative impacts on biodiversity. We can also exclude certain activities. We can also exclude certain areas from finance. So for example, the protected areas like the Ramsar wetlands, we wouldn't finance assets or projects that have direct or indirect impacts in those territories. We can also impose certain acceptance thresholds or tolerance thresholds for activities that are sensitive in the sense that they have some negative impacts on biodiversity. We can also sit down with clients and draw up improvement plans or objectives that are time-bound. On the positive side, we use the instruments that are quite well established on the market in the green finance market, informed by best practice frameworks. Increasingly, we use sustainability-linked finance because unfortunately, green assets and green projects aren't enough to lift the entire economy in the right direction. And of course, transition finance is a new area of opportunity that the market is currently exploring. If we go to the next slide, we can, and the next slide, just some of the considerations that a commercial bank will have when looking at tools for biodiversity impact. So we were interested in tools that we could apply on the entire portfolio level or on a specific company level. So being able to inform decisions both on individual clients, but also on segmenting a sector, for example. So on the portfolio level, things like identifying economic potential, like in terms of reduced economic costs, while at the same time addressing environmental impacts. An example is raw material use here, or being able to benchmark a sector of the portfolio or a class of clients to identify the best practices from the laggards and start engagement in that sector. Or, for example, we could look at an entire theme. Let's say we could take a look at soft commodities or deforestation, so taking the theme of deforestation and identifying sectors that have exposure to that theme. So these are some of the considerations we had when we started looking for tools. And if we go to the next slide, we'll be able to see some of the tools that we're engaging. We've already mentioned those in the webinar so far. I'll just mention a couple of them. For example, BFFI is a tool that we've tested in our retail banking portfolio, in project finance, but also in our investment brokerage to create a benchmark that we can use to benchmark sustainable investment portfolios. IBAT is a tool that we've used for years, actually, in project finance. It provides geolocation-specific data on the biodiversity side, so it's really useful, I should say instrumental, in identifying project-related impacts. Encore is a tool which is really promising. I think it will be released later this year. We've participated in a test of the draft version of the tool. It can be used both on an individual client level, but also to look at a whole portfolio. It provides benchmarking options. So really some of the things that you saw on the previous slide are addressed quite well in the Encore tool. Trace.finance is a tool which is focused on soft commodities. So a very specific use case. It's really useful in identifying deforestation risk, and it provides a very comprehensive sustainability assessment of soft commodity traders. It's been really useful. So again, I think my key message would be that it's good to keep the full overview of tools that are available, because based on your use case or based on your based on your interests and needs, you may end up using different tools for the different portfolios or the different types of projects that you're looking to assess. So we're really proponents of the toolbox approach. It's something that we also use in climate, and I think it'll be something that we use for biodiversity as well. This was the last slide. Let me know if there's any questions.
Thank you, Rado. We will. There are a lot of questions in the chat, so please write them down, put them in the chat, and we will first go to the next speaker, and then at the end we will answer all the questions, or selection, because we cannot answer them all. Thank you very much, Rado, for your presentation. Next speaker, Jean-Guillaume Pelladin. Please give the floor to you to tell something about your experience with biodiversity measurement.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I'm not a dinosaur. I'm not 65 million years old, just 52. But yeah, very happy to be there, trying to testimony on our experience. Next slide, please. In fact, so Sycomore is a small Paris-based asset manager specialized in listed equity, and we are a mission-led company and now a certified B Corp. And our specificity is to have a stakeholder approach that is more structured since 2015, and through our internal ESG model called SPICE. And the E of SPICE is for the environment in a vision of environment is the base of the human society, in which economy is a small part of it. And so we structured our natural capital strategy 6 years ago. It's public on our website. And we started also at this time to invest R&D work into the net environmental contribution, called the NEC, working with a lot of external expertise from two expert consultancies, Quantis and iCare & Consult. And I will share with you what we can learn from this. And then about 1.5 years ago, at the end of 2019, we started a joint work with AXA, with BNP Paribas AM, and with Mirova to select a solution to have a more quantitative, better biodiversity metrics that we can use as asset manager. Next slide, please. So I will share with you just some tips and tricks to avoid, and there are traps to avoid. The first one I would say is to overestimate carbon footprint as it is used in finance. And just on this slide, you have the carbon footprints. You have to read 12 here and EC 38. But you have the carbon footprint or the carbon intensity, depending on if you divide by the enterprise value in the first row here, or carbon intensity in the content per €1 million of revenues. And in both cases, you have these results. It means that if you want to decarbonize a portfolio, you have to sell Alstom, providing train solutions, and you have to sell Veolia, and you have to buy Google, Zalando, or even Ferrari. Next slide. And the problem is that even if you adopt a science-based carbon footprint with correcting the numerator and the denominator, using a life cycle approach and dividing by the functionality, which is on this slide the liter of different drinks, you are still in a trap, which is to be carbon only. And on this slide, you have a comparison between 4 different types of beverage. And the slide shows us that in terms of carbon footprinting, the PET bottle is the greenest solution, which is true, but only for climate, not on other dimension, and especially for plastic pollution, ocean, and biodiversity, of course. And so, next slide, please. Our belief at the beginning, 6 years ago, was that we have to have an holistic integration beyond carbon and including biodiversity. And the question today, and I'm happy this seminar is illustrating this, is not the question if we have to, including the planetary boundaries perspective, but the question is how quickly and reliably can we integrate them. Next slide, please. And so two cases to give you hope. The answer and the main message of what I want to say is that it is possible. First illustration is with the net environmental contribution that so we started developing 6 years ago, and now it became 2 years ago an open source metric, fully transparent methodology. You can download it on the site of necinitiative.org. It's 300 pages and covering 15 framework. And you have here just a rapid summary of how we are integrating different dimensions of environmental pressures, including climate, resource and waste, biodiversity, of course, water and air quality. And you have on this part of the slide, but you don't, on the left, the right part of the slide, example of specific KPI and information we use. And you have in blue the one for biodiversity. So we're using some quantitative figures like species depletion, for example, for the electricity framework in number of species per kilowatt hour, or part of the recipe method for different framework in the production area. And also we are using green certification, for example, organic farming. You have a bonus inside the neck for organic farming, and you will have a malus for intensive farming on the other side. And next slide, please. The result of this, just to give you hope, is that you can have this picture. So the neck is a unique indicator from 100% to plus 100%, measuring the alignment with the ecological transition. So here on the right side, green side, you are fully aligned with the ecological transition, including climate, biodiversity, etc. And on the left side, on the red side and left side, you are completely disaligned. And what is interesting in that, you see that Veolia is on the green side and Ferrari is on the red left side. And also we managed to capture, so for example, for the consumer staples and food sector, we have vegetable on the right side, and we have beef, with, for example, with McDonald's on the left side. And we were also able to capture the negative impact of pesticide with the pesticide manufacturer with a negative neck. Next slide, please. And second experience, I will be very brief, is what we started 1.5 years ago with a joint initiative with AXA IM, BNP Paribas AM, and Mirova. We decided to build and share a common tendering process with 7 requirements that are based on impact, very granular approach and sectorial estimates. Easy to use, it's the experience of the practitioner. For example, the NEC is really a tool made for practitioner by practitioner. And it has to be flexible, modular, and transparent, to be aggregatable and understandable, and with large scope, cross-asset, and with related to financial materiality. And then we observed that last year there was really a momentum, and we have a very successful interest in proposing an investor statement on biodiversity metric measurement. It was signed by 13 investors worldwide, and on this statement, it is shared the 3 key common principles based on life cycle assessment with positive and negative impact, this aggregability from company up to portfolio, index, etc., and of course transparency and based on science and accessible information. Next slide. And so this is the last slide, and this work has been a very collaborative, very interesting journey, and also a way to increase our competency inside Sycomore, for example. And it started at the beginning of 2020 with a call for expression of interest, where 14 candidates have proposed responses. There was then a pre-selection, and the 7 of the 14 candidates have been invited to an oral presentation in front of a jury supported by an independent scientific committee. And then from this oral presentation, 3 finalists were selected, and we asked them to give their best and final offers. And then we selected finally the consortium of Iceberg Data Lab and iCare, which is among the metrics you have presented. And then we entered the contracting phase for a 3-year contract for all the 4 members. And now we are in the deployment with the first data set already delivered and the planning which is on track. And I think it's question and answer.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Unfortunately, we run out of time, so we suggest that we will answer all of your questions via email because we don't have enough time and we have one more speaker. So we will answer all your questions by email and also by the participants of this webinar, so you can read through it. Then I would like to give the floor to Jessica Smith. Jessica is responsible for biodiversity, the ecosystem lead of UNEP-FI. And Jessica will tell us something about UNEP-FI and the measurement initiatives that are that she is taking with the banking sector.
Great, thank you so much, Anita, and thanks all for having me. I know we're running out of time, so I will just distill my comments. I also wanted to send apologies on behalf of Gemma James, who is my counterpart at the PRI. So between there's hundreds of banking members and insurance members and thousands of asset owners and asset managers. So we work very closely together to share between the industries, and Gemma would have liked to be here. So UNEP-FI is one of the co-owners of the Encore tool with UNEP WSMC and Global Canopy within the Natural Capital Finance Alliance. And Rado from ING shared that they are testing the tool that will be released, and we continue to do updates to Encore through the year. We also have forthcoming guidance for the principles for responsible banking signatories on biodiversity targets. So, really we welcome this guidance, and it's such an exciting conversation around measurements, and it's really important that we have harmonized measurements, not to confuse FIs and to make sure that we're talking about the same currency and, to smooth the wheels. I think also I wanted to bring a bit of a UN view today because we are, as UNEP-FI, we're a partnership between UNEP and the financial sector. And I think there's 3 key points I want to highlight in the minute that we have left. So the first is the location specificity of biodiversity. And, I think this is something to wrap your head around particularly when you come from the climate measurement space. A lot of the biodiversity in the world, the globally valued biodiversity and the biodiversity that is valued through ecosystem services for people's livelihoods is in the global south. And very much we try to take a global approach and include the global south, for example, in our Encore piloting and testing, and in, when we're coming forward with guidance. And we very much see that it has to be a global conversation from that perspective. The other is not to lose sight of the fact that biodiversity includes values. There's value judgments, value perceptions on how we measure biodiversity. And I just encourage everybody to read Pasquale et al. In Nature Sustainability last week. Some of the co-authors of the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment published a paper on pluralistic approaches to biodiversity. And I think as we're moving towards the global biodiversity framework and we're trying to find solutions, we need to have the voice of Indigenous people, local communities who are the stewards, across much of the world of biodiversity. So, I think there's issues of livelihoods, rights, access to resources that we always need to know are in the background of conversations on biodiversity, and we want to include their voices in the measurement and the management. And then I think the third is around the speed. So we certainly all know that there's an urgency here to bend the curve of nature loss by 2030. And there are several processes. There are industry-led processes like the TNFD. There's the Intergovernmental Policy Science Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services is starting a process on biodiversity impacts and dependencies measurement as well. And then, we have the Align project that has more of a science-based approach. There's all these processes that are around the measurement, and we do need common measurements, and we do need this common currency. But as was highlighted, there are a lot of tools, and we do need a dashboard approach. So we also need to think, beyond that to tools like exclusions that are helping us in the interim to bend the curve of nature loss. So the location of biodiversity, the values around biodiversity, and the speed that we need to act were the 3 points I wanted to just add to the conversation today. So thanks very much for adding us today, and we'll share the paper that I mentioned.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jessica, for sharing your views on this. So with this, I would like to close this webinar, and we'll continue to work on this. Today, we'll have a new publication as well, made together with UNEP-FI and the PRI. We made an overview of 12 finance and biodiversity initiatives, collaborative platforms. You can find it on the Finance for Biodiversity website, and also soon on the PRI and UNEP-FI website, and of course the BID platform. So we'll make quarterly updates of the guide of the maturity levels and also of the overview that I'm putting in the chat. We'll continue to share practices through the several platforms that are out there. We'll make a yearly update of the guide that was presented today. And of course, we'll seek effective collaboration on this where possible. And there are several initiatives collaborating on this. Find them in the overview, like the Align project, and also the PPAF platform, and of course the ENCORE group led by UNEP-FI. Thanks a lot, everyone. Keep measuring and keep sharing, and we'll see you another time.